So there's two things you probably haven't heard all that much inside of Destiny. One of them is the exotic Stormdancer Brace. The other one is elemental well mods, which have not exactly been meta due to the fact that Charged with Light is so good, as well as Warmont cells. But mentioned in the most recent TWAB, Warmont cells are getting slapped in the face, pretty heavily I might add, but Bungie's attempt to slightly make it up to us with this nerf is to buff two elemental well mods, one of them being elemental armaments, the other one being Font of Might. Fellas, today we're going to be breaking down both elemental well mods, Stormdancer's Brace, as well as how these things will synergize together. Timestamps will be on the screen in front of you, but let's start with Stormdancer's Brace. Now this is a Warlock exotic. It comes with the exotic perk Ascending Amplitude, where each enemy you defeat with Storm Trance increases the damage you deal with Storm Trance. Now I wanted to focus on this exotic because here recently we talked about exotics to lock in going into the next season, and I completely overlooked this exotic, but Bungie actually came out and stated that it's actually going to be receiving a major buff, where it now not only amplifies your damage, but it will also refund you up to 50% of your super energy after your super ends, based of course on the number of kills. This is fantastic, as Crown, which was a recommended exotic from us, has been the go-to exotic for most Stormcallers, both bottom and top tree. But with this change, Stormdancer's Brace may be the meta option for Stormcallers. Now to me, the best subclass here to merge here with Stormdancers is actually bottom tree Stormcaller, which has a lot of benefits, but it's only going to get better next season. Arc Soul is actually getting a duration buff from 12 seconds to 13 seconds, also getting a fire rate buff by 10%. Landfall will now fire 5 arc ground projectiles on cast, which is leading me to believe that Landfall is going to be substantially better than what it is now, both in its damage and AoE, as well as the projectiles themselves, probably having some sort of tracking capabilities. This is important because Stormdancer's Brace actually received a subtle nerf. Now to be quite honest with you, I don't even know when this exactly happened, but if you notice at the bottom left hand of the screen, you have Ascending Amplitude. This used to only stack up to 5, and at maximum stacks of Ascending Amplitude, you would get the benefit of 75% increase in damage. However, Stormdancer's Brace actually got a rework where it actually goes up to 10 stacks, and even though it gives you more damage on the tail end, and substantially so, maxing out at 100% at 10 stacks, at 5 stacks, it only goes up to 50%. This was a problem because the time duration of the super itself, when you actually cast it, was obviously much less than Crown of Tempest. Crown would allow you to hang on to your super much longer, and of course it dipped into your neutral game. With Stormdancer's Brace, even though on paper this was a buff, due to the limitation of the duration of the super, by the time you even got high enough stacks to do damage to a boss, your super was almost out. Hence why Bungie is going out of their way and buffing this exotic. Will it be enough? I think in combination with the landfall changes, it will, as essentially you won't have to worry about killing a bunch of ads before focusing on a boss, but instead cast your super, allow the AoE and projectiles to clean up everything in the room, and then you can proceed to focus on whatever high health target you're trying to super down. Now some beautiful things here about Stormcaller. First up, a rework back in like 2019 allowed Stormcallers in their supers, both top and bottom trees, to scale their damage up 150% over 5 seconds of continuous use of the attack. Now it's actually only a 50% buff, although I understand why it says 150% due to the 1.5 multiplier, but in actuality, it's only a 50% buff. Still substantial, and all it requires is for you to focus your tickle fingers for more than 5 seconds. This in combination with Ascending Amplitude at times 10 maximizes that damage by 200% from minimum to maximum. Now in terms of DPS, will this exotic and the changes Bungie has presented to it make Stormcallers the meta super inside of PvE? Well, it really comes down to how many kills is required to meet that 50% refund in super energy. On top of that, how good exactly is Landfall going into this next season? And then the other question is, considering Geomax stabilizers will no longer top your super off, would it just be better to rock Stormdancer's Brace instead of Geos? Now granted, Chaos Reach without Geos in terms of duration is pretty abysmal, which is why I'm kind of like putting all my eggs in one basket and planning to just marry this up to bottom tree Stormcaller. The goal though is not necessarily to have the most damage dealing super in the game, but instead to have the best ad clearing super, especially in content like Grandmaster Nightfalls, where ads are super thick, where things like Ascending Amplitude greatly benefit you when it comes to clearing those meteor ads. Depending on how good Landfall actually is, like if it just clears out an entire room upon cast, then it is the obvious go-to choice here for Stormcaller. Stormdancer's Brace, which means the more supers you can get, the better. Which takes us to the mod Font of Wisdom. Now, this Elemental Well mod actually allows you, upon picking up an Elemental Well that matches your subclass energy type, to gain temporary significant increase in your intellect, improving that recharge rate for your super. Now, that increase is only for about 30 seconds. And a lot of people have been saying the same thing, that they don't feel like this mod is doing much of anything. Here's the problem with this mod. It doesn't go past the intellect cap. And we did side-by-side comparisons here, showing that there was no improvement whatsoever from the ability regeneration of Font of Wisdom. Where this mod really begins to shine is for my players that are actually stacking all of their attributes and points into their neutral game and keeping their intellect to a bare minimum. You see, the Font of Wisdom mod allows for max intellect, whether you're rocking tier 1 intellect, tier 2, tier 3, it doesn't matter. Originally, a lot of people thought it gave you plus 50 intellect, but even here rocking tier 3 intellect, it was still giving me max intellect. Now, what this does is it actually opens up things for you elsewhere, especially when we talk about bottom tree Stormcaller, considering we have things like Rising Storm, where your melee ability recharges your super grenade as well as your melee, and pretty substantially. In this situation, max strength is exactly what you want to combine with it. On top of that, every time you cast a rift on this subclass, you're granting you and your fire team Arc Souls, which, considering the buffs that are coming to Arc Souls, all the more reason to use them. The only questionable part here is Electrostatic Surge. As stated in the previous swab, Electrostatic Surge now increases sprint speed when allies are near. Now, the reason why I bring this up, currently right now, Electrostatic Surge allows your rift to last longer. It also charges faster when allies are nearby. Will this be an additional benefit on top of that, or will the increase in sprint speed replace that completely? Now, Bungie has actually gone out of their way to say also or include it when talking about subclass changes. When they don't mention that, normally it means it's getting replaced. But wording is wording. We'll see whenever we get there in the next sandbox. But what Font of Wisdom allows here is for you to spec elsewhere. And as long as you are picking up those elemental wells that of course are matching your subclass, you will gain the benefits of max intellect, which actually takes us to the elemental well portion of this video. Let's talk about elemental armaments and Font of Might. First up, elemental armaments is looking to be more consistent in its spawning of elemental wells. Now, notice the wording. It states increased chance to spawn an elemental well based on the tier of the enemy defeated. Currently right now, I don't think it really matters the tier of the enemy. I think it sits somewhere around like 7 kills to spawn an elemental well with elemental armaments, which is kind of annoying. That's 7 kills on majors, super thick ads, it doesn't matter. And again, elemental armaments requires your weapon takedowns to have the same elemental damage type that's matching your subclass in order to produce these elemental wells. So you're having to jump through a number of hoops here to even get one of these wells. But considering Font of Wisdom will grant you max intellect, we also want to combine this with the benefit of the mod Font of Might. Now, this mod has been greatly overshadowed by high energy fire, as currently in this sandbox, it only offers a 10% buff there to weapon damage for 5 seconds, whereas high energy fire offers a 20% buff indefinitely, or until you consume a stack of Charged with Light. But with the buff coming, doubling that duration to 10 seconds and increasing that damage bonus from 10% to 25%, yes, it's substantial. Enough so that I would highly suggest considering getting used to rocking these elemental well based mods. What's even more interesting is that Font of Might actually stacks with high energy fire. And as you know, we do have a mod in the game called Elemental Charge that actually rewards us 2 stacks of Charged with Light upon picking up one of these elemental wells. Of course, again, the requirement is that the well has to match your subclass. But with the buffs coming to Font of Might and the ability to stack with high energy fire and Charged with Light, upon picking up these elemental wells, you could be walking flat-footed with a 50% buff to your weapon damage, which is just nasty. And I'm sure you're already thinking about a number of things here to rock with this. And again, you don't have to fully spec here for damage. You can just let Font of Might carry your weapon damage and still rock mods like Protective Light or even mods like Reactive Pulse, which is actually one of my favorite mods in the game, especially when you combine it with Trinity Ghoul, as Trinity Ghoul and its Exotic Catalyst states that Lightning Rod triggers from any arc damage final blow, which means kills from your grenades, your Arc Souls, your super, and even the AoE damage from Reactive Pulse, that too provides arc damage, thus allowing you to proc Lightning Rod, allowing you to go Arc-tastic with Trinity Ghoul. And even other weapons that are doing arc damage can even proc Lightning Rod as long as Trinity Ghoul is in your hand when the arc-based kill actually occurs. So for instance, I have an interference here that does arc damage. As long long as I shoot it and swap to Trinity Ghoul as quickly as I can, I'll proc Lightning Rod. Now granted, that's a few more hoops to jump through, which is not necessary. Trinity Ghoul all on its own is a fantastic bow, and considering that overload bow mods are coming next season, I would highly advise befriending this bow and its exotic catalyst, as well as maybe this entire build. Everything here, guys, synergizes. Stormdancer's Brace in its ability to now refund you 50% of your super. Bottom Tree Stormcaller and its Arc Soul buff, as well as its Landfall buff. Font of Wisdom, which will now allow you to spec in your neutral game, which even works out better with Rising Storm on Stormcaller. And the buffs to Elemental Armaments and Font of Might. Everything here is looking to synergize extremely well next season. And again, for my guys that are rocking a high strength build, make sure to combine this with hands-on, as that mod should double up with Rising Storm to give you even more super energy. I think when we get into the sandbox next season, we'll perfect this in a way to constantly have weapon buffs, consistent arc damage, and a number of ways to constantly feed into our super energy. Stormdancer's Brace and this Trinity Ghoul combo is looking to be pretty nasty. So guys, I just wanted to make this video as we didn't really cover Stormdancer's Brace in our Warlock exotics to lock down. I think this exotic is shaping up to be very, very good next season. I'm excited to try it out. Would I still prefer Warmod cells in their current form? Hell yeah. But it looks like Bungie's trying to make Elemental Wells the meta option for mods, which is why we'll adapt like always. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.